So today we're going to be looking at the Battle of Rovine. Let's get to it, shall we?
Of a crusade against Bayezid. As King Sigismund of Hungary was in the process of forming a Crusader alliance in Europe to relieve the blockade of Constantinople, news of a gathering Crusader army trickled down to Edirne. Although the European response to the blockade of Constantinople would not be swift, by 1394, Sultan Bayezid I had already begun war preparations at home for the eventual conflict. During this limbo period, Ottoman forts in the Balkans were reinforced and resupplied with new garrison soldiers from Anatolia. Despite these preparations, the Sultan was not one to stay idle and wait for the enemy to arrive at his gates. In only 5 years since acceding to the throne, Bayezid had achieved what no prior Ottoman ruler could have dreamed of. Almost all of Anatolia had been conquered, all major opposition in the Balkans had been crushed, and a significant attempt to seize Constantinople was underway. Instead of staying idle, the ambitious Ottoman Sultan planned on going on the offensive in the region to get a head start in the inevitable hostilities to come. To secure his northern borders from the upcoming Crusader invasion, Bayezid launched a surprise military campaign against Wallachia during the fall of 1394. The Ottoman ruler most likely wished to secure control over the Danube River and create a new regional buffer vassal state before the onset of hostilities.
Yeah, as we do know, Wallachia eventually does end up as an Ottoman province, vassal state if you would. And some of their later exploits, like with, I believe, Michael the Brave, who we covered earlier this year, and, Vlad the Impaler. Definitely some of my favorite parts in history to learn about, because it really is just one of those great underdog stories. And again, the Ottomans taking the initiative. There's basically a crusade coalition being formed, and at least Bayezid has the advantage of already having the territory, so it's not like he's leaving, he just needs to fortify, he needs to be making moves and getting, prepared, because he's essentially going to be fighting a defensive war. So this is already a great move. I'm assuming if this is where the Ottomans take Wallachia, that's a great starting point just for having a buffer state, as he said, and really getting just ready for this epic battle that's going to happen.
Crossing the Danube from near Nicopolis, the Ottoman army made their way north to capture the Wallachian capital of Kotir de Argesh. The Ottoman Sultan thought that through his lightning campaign into the region, Mircea I of Wallachia would have no choice but to bow down to his rule. However, after a few days of raiding and burning the countryside alongside the Danube, no response came from the Wallachian voivode. It was only after Bayezid began his forced march into the forested interior of the region that he would be met with the first signs of local resistance. As he knew he did not have the men or resources to stand up to the Ottomans head-on, Mircea employed his Wallachian skirmishers to conduct guerrilla operations against the numerically superior invaders.
Yeah, we see this a lot with, Wallachias, right? Every time we cover them in this series, they're always using guerrilla warfare against the Ottomans and their enemies, usually due to the lack of manpower and just facing numerically superior kingdoms. So, and they usually do really well in guerrilla warfare against the Ottomans. I guess I'm thinking of, Michael the Brave and, Vlad the Impaler. So, yeah.
Entire week, the Ottoman host was harassed by Wallachian hit-and-run attacks while they marched through the unfamiliar lands. Exhausted from the forced march and sustaining heavy losses, the Ottoman army made camp near the Argesh River. Refusing to let the Muslim invaders catch a breath, on the night of October 10th, 1394, Mircea ordered a surprise ambush. Masked underneath the Wallachian forest, the resilient voivode, much to the surprise of Bayezid, descended upon the main Ottoman camp. The skirmish, later dubbed the Battle of Karaninavarsa or the Battle of the Trenches, would be a bloody affair as Wallachian and Ottoman troops were engulfed in a fierce and violent melee over the palisades of the camp. On multiple occasions, the Sultan's own life was endangered, as the battle-turned-brawl lasted well into the dawn. Seeing that he was in a precarious situation...
Yeah, again, the guerrilla warfare, man, we've seen it to great effect so many times in this series, and just the hit and run. I think, like, the Wallachians, like I said, we've seen this plenty of times already in this channel's history. Usually very effective against the Ottomans. Like, I think the Ottomans, especially Bayezid's, more used to more pitched battles, so... you know, essentially getting jumped relentlessly by the Wallachians as they use hit-and-run tactics. Probably the smartest thing they could do, this continual hit-and-run, thing.
And having taken many losses during the course of the entire campaign, Bayezid ordered the remnants of his army to withdraw back to the Danube into Ottoman territory in defeat.
Wow.
For the first time, the Thunderbolt had met his match in battle.
Dang, that's a pretty great victory for the Wallachians. Like I said, man, the way they handled that was really well. And it seems to always kind of be a trend, huh? Like I said, I mentioned Michael the Brave and Vlad the Impaler. There's kind of a trend with Wallachia using hit and run against the Ottomans to great effect. Guerrilla warfare. And yeah, the trend continues. This is 3-3 now. But yeah.
Despite this setback, Bayezid was prepared to invade Wallachia again during the spring of 1395, as during the interim period, Mircea had travelled to Transylvania to sign a formal alliance treaty with Sigismund for his upcoming crusade. This time around, the Ottoman Sultan called upon his Balkan vassals to join him on the campaign. Powerless to decline, Marko Mjernjavčević of Prilep, Konstantin Dejanović of Velbajд, and Prince Stefan Lazarević of Moravian Serbia would all personally lead their retinue of soldiers into the Sultan's camp in Bulgaria, and once again swear loyalty to their Muslim liege. Only the Serbian nobleman Vuk Branković, in an act of open defiance, refused to send troops to Bayezid. However, the Ottoman Sultan would turn a blind eye to this insubordinate act for the time being, as he rushed to cross over the Danube to once and for all crush the forces of the Wallachian voivode.
Yeah, Vuk better be careful. I don't really think he has the power to actively defeat Bayezid. So he's just fortunate Bayezid is a bit busy at the moment. I mean, that's bald for sure, but probably not wise to upset the Ottomans, especially when you're essentially under their thumb, you know?
Vote. This time, the Sultan invaded the country from the west through the lands of his vassal, the Tsardom of Vidin. The Wallachian skirmishers once again employed guerrilla warfare on Bayezid's army as they marched on the royal capital of Kurtia de Argesh. Perhaps due to the guerrilla campaign being less effective this time around, Mircea would proceed to form a great Wallachian army to fend off Bayezid. According to Romanian sources, the Wallachian voivode ordered all able men of his realm to gather up their arms and join his cause in order to defend their homeland from the Muslim invaders. Many settlements were abandoned, and their crops burned as the Ottomans made their way north. Not
Yeah, scorched earth? Sounds like scorched earth policy. And yeah.
wanting to be bogged in a long siege, and wanting to resolve the war in one swift blow, Bayezid bypassed the many Wallachian forts in the region, and pursued a field battle with Mircea near his capital. However, still knowing that he could not take on the Ottoman host in an open field battle, Mircea stationed his grand army in the strategic Rovine marshlands south of his capital. The marshlands were littered with small narrow valleys, caves, old ruins, and impassable waterways, making it an ideal landscape for a defending army fighting against a numerically superior enemy.
Again, the Wallachians, I think they really realize it's good to recognize that, you know, they don't have the manpower or strength to take on the Ottomans, so they use a lot of, you know, tricks to get the one up. First it was, you know, guerrilla warfare, though now it seems in this second invasion that's not being fully utilized, and that, you know, the Wallachian king now has to give sort of a battle, but even then, he's still choosing to use something to help give him an advantage, and that's mainly just picking a really good area for battle, you know, and fighting essentially as defensively as he can. So, yeah, I guess we'll see, though. I don't know. Still, I think Bayezid has proven himself as a really good commander. Not to take away from the Wallachians, at least on sort of pitched battles. So this is still, I think, a very dangerous situation for the Wallachians. Though, I will say, though, like I said, the terrain and the geography that, you know, the Wallachians have chosen will probably help them a lot. But I guess we'll see.
As Bayezid deployed his army on the battlefield, many sections of his host would be bogged down and immobilized in the marshes, such as his heavy Capiculu and Serbian cavalry. However, this would not stop the Ottoman Sultan from pursuing Mircia's army, since, after all, what was one marshland?
Okay, according to the tellings, yeah, I know, the Wallachian king, I can't pronounce his name, went to Bayezid's tent, disguised as an envoy before the battle to ask him to leave Wallachia in peace to no avail. Wow, that's pretty ballsy, though. Yeah, I have to kind of give it to, the Wallachian king. Like, he's not a coward, I think. Or, you know, he's not, he is brave, for sure. And he is trying everything he can, though there is a bit of trickery involved, but you kind of need to use trickery because, like I said, just having a full-on slogging match with the Ottomans would just be straight-up suicidal. Like, he needs to use everything he can to keep going, right?
And compared to the conquest of Anatolia. According to the more dramatic retellings, the following Battle of Rovine would last for an entire week. During the dragged-out battle, multiple Ottoman attempts to breach through the marshes failed, as many were killed by Wallachian archers. It was during one of these attempts to breach the marshes that the entire Ottoman vanguard of irregular infantry would be cut to pieces by incoming Wallachian arrow fire. Ottoman attempts to flank around the marshes to strike at Mircia's main camp were also thwarted.
Marco to Constantine on the eve of the battle. Even though I may be one of the first to die, I pray to God to help Christians in this battle.
As the struggle continued, the Wallachian troops began digging trenches throughout the local terrain as a means to defend themselves from wave after wave of Ottoman assaults, to much success. With each passing day, Ottoman casualties rose up as Ottoman corpses scattered the marshlands of Rovine. Amongst the dead were Bayezid's Serbian vassals, Marko Mjunjevčević of Prilep and Konstantin Dejanović of Velbazhd.
Holy crap, dude, the Ottomans are giving them a fight. Like, already killed 2 vassals, like, leaders. Holy crap. Again, like, it seems so far Bayezid is trying to brute force this. He's like, we have the numerical superiority. We can break them, and maybe he might. Like, that still, we'll see if it works at the end. Even if it does, he still did not. He still ain't walking away without like some damage done to his side, you know. But it's like on the other side, the Wallachians are using a lot of strategy. They are using, you know, choosing good terrain, building trenches. They're just playing a lot smarter, I feel. And, you know, they have to, because they don't have the power to just brute force this, like the Ottomans do. You know? At least so far.
Only after a surprise Wallachian nighttime assault on the main Ottoman camp did Sultan Bayezid conclude that further attempts to break through the marshes were futile. Again,
and the Wallachians love their night attacks, man. And it always keeps working. Well, you know. It always does get the Ottomans off guard, and you just have to give it. Like I said, I'm impressed by the Wallachians. Every time we cover them, they are always on the defensive against the Ottomans. They are always the underdogs, but they always do really well for themselves, despite the fact, you know?
Cutting his losses short and withdrawing from the battlefield, Bayezid once again abandoned his campaign against Wallachia. The Battle of Rovine had ended in a...
That's amazing. Like I said, Wallachia, it's just, like, amazing, man. Just an amazing display of defensive warfare that they showed, and gave Bayezid 2 defeats. Again, just really amazing.
A decisive victory for the Wallachian voivode, even if it came at a great loss in manpower, as he defeated an Ottoman army multiple times the size of his own host. However, not all was lost for the Ottomans after Rovine. In the months after the battle, Mircea I had become increasingly unpopular since his prolonged struggle against the Ottomans had drastically depleted the Principality's military and economic resources. Eventually, he was deposed by his court rival Vlad I. As Mircea I fled to the nearby Kingdom of Hungary, Vlad I submitted before Bayezid, removing Wallachia from the anti-Ottoman Crusader coalition, and began to pay tribute to Edirne.
Yeah. You know, it's a bit unfortunate that that just happened. Cause Mircea is how they're pronouncing it. Mircea really just put on a great defensive, and it seems like he won. At least Bayezid seemed like he was ready to call it somewhat quits, or at least give Wallachia more time to breathe before another attempt. It's just the way kings and generals phrase it. Seems like he was done with Wallachia. But, so it seems like Wallachia probably could have kept its independence for a bit longer. But again, we always see this with Wallachia, huh? Like, you know, their leader will put up a great defense against the Ottomans, usually prevail, but then immediately get screwed over by their own nobility. It seems like the nobility of Wallachia is usually always the undoing of these kings who defend the country. It's never the Ottomans themselves, it's always the nobility turning on their king, which always makes Wallachia fall. I think again of like Vlad the Impaler, you know, so many of the nobility flocked towards his brother's side once I think Mehmed was left, and that kind of didn't help him at all. And, you know, obviously Mikhail the Brave got lost a lot of support among the nobility. So that, again, I keep bringing this up because it seems like a trend, you know, we keep seeing. And again, it's happened. So yeah, that sucks, because it seemed like Wallachia could have probably, if the nobility had remained on their king's side, probably could have kept their independence maybe for a bit longer. I don't know how much longer, but it seems like they had that in the bag. But obviously, you know, the drain of manpower and resources for this war, yeah, a lot of sacrifice on that end.
Although unsuccessful on the battlefield, Bayezid had, through diplomacy, secured his northern border with Wallachia. Now, the Ottoman Sultan turned his gaze back to his Balkan holdings, for he wanted to crush all remaining opposition in the region before the onset of the Crusader invasion. Upon crossing the Danube, Ottoman armies were ordered to besiege the last Bulgarian holdout of Nicopolis, still held by the relentless Tsar Ivan Shishman. Back during the reign of Murad I, Ottoman forces had tried capturing the Bulgarian fortress town to no avail, but this time around, more resources were allocated for the siege. After a short and one-sided struggle, Nicopolis fell to the forces of Bayezid, thus bringing a formal end to the Bulgarian Empire. Soon after the siege, Tsar Ivan Shishman of Bulgaria would be first imprisoned, then executed on the orders of Bayezid.
After his execution, Ivan's son and heir, Alexander, converted to Islam and was appointed as an Ottoman Pasha.
After putting an end to Shishman's realm, the Ottoman Sultan continued down south to his Serbian holdings. The former lands of the two slain Serbian despots from the Battle of Rovine, Marko and Konstantin,
it's currently 1 a.m.
were formally annexed into the Ottoman Sultanate, as they had no male sons to succeed in their seats.
Wow.
In addition to these land acquisitions, during the same period, Bayezid invaded the lands of Vuk Brankovic, the Serbian noble who had failed to supply him with troops during his Wallachian campaign. In a short period of time, the insubordinate Serbian lord would be defeated in battle and imprisoned, while his territories were transferred to the more loyal Stefan Lazarevic. After spending 2 years in an Ottoman cell, Vuk Brankovic, the Serbian noble who defied Edirne since the Battle of Kosovo, died from natural causes.
Yeah, that was really foolish, Vuk. You know, it was foolish for him to try to defy the Ottomans, because he did not have any strength to actually back up that move.
For the most part, the year 1395 had been kind to the Thunderbolt. The last 12 months had seen Bayezid consolidate his power in the Balkans before the arrival of the Crusaders. The Ottoman Sultan now controlled the major Danube crossing towns of Vidin, Nicopolis and Silistra. Wallachia had left the Crusader coalition, and a pro-Ottoman ruler now sat in Curtea de Argeș. The Bulgarian Empire's dubious ruler Ivan Shishman had been murdered and his realm conquered. Lastly, Vuk Brankovic had been deposed, and now the Serbian realm was unified under a loyal Ottoman vassal prince.
Yep, everything's going up and up for Bayezid, man. Like, he's getting his preparation for this upcoming siege masterful, you know. I mean, siege, but you know, this invasion from the Crusaders. So yeah, guy moved ahead and is fortifying himself very well here.
However, the following year would see Bayezid come face to face with his greatest challenge yet. Since their conversion to Christianity under the Arpad dynasty during the 11th century, the Kingdom of Hungary had been one of Europe's largest and most formidable states. The kingdom was largely located on the rich farming lands of the Great Hungarian Plain, situated at the crossroads of Central and Southeastern Europe. Under the Anjou dynasty, Hungary had expanded its reach deeper into the Balkans during the same period in which the Ottoman Sultanate was also making gains in the region. During the reign of Louis I, multiple wars were fought against Bosnia, Moldavia, Wallachia, Serbia and Bulgaria in order to bring them into the Hungarian sphere of influence. Although many of these states willingly yielded to Hungarian suzerainty initially in order to deal with the growing Ottoman threat, Louis's death in 1382 would end Hungarian dreams of forming a Magyar-led Balkan peninsula. The late king would be succeeded by his eldest daughter, Mary I, whom herself was married to the son of the Holy Roman Emperor, Prince Sigismund. In the following years, Sigismund would be crowned king, and with the untimely death of Mary in 1395, he would become the sole ruler of Hungary. With the accession of Sigismund also came the first Ottoman raids into Hungary, and thus military preparations were made to strike back at Edirne. The crusade to come would be a vital opportunity for the young foreign king of Hungary to make a name for himself and cement his rule over his Magyar nobles. While Bayezid
Yeah, it seems like Hungary's the last major force in this area that can directly challenge the Ottomans. At least the closest. You know what I mean? Like right here. Is logically the next big one that can just fight the Ottomans. And it seems like Hungary, unlike like Wallachia, for example, actually does have a pretty sizable realm and seems to have pretty better resources in terms of just how it's able to fight multiple kingdoms at once. So yeah, and we have seen Hungary fight the Ottomans like later on and actually kind of be sort of a rival, though we never go into specifics about Hungary fighting everyone else. So I'm kind of hoping we do, just to see a bit more of them, you know?
was on a conquest spree in the Balkans. King Sigismund had been slowly forming a great European Crusader alliance against Edirne. Although Europe had been politically divided during the Western Schism between the popes of Rome and Avignon, Sigismund's European envoys around the continent were fairly successful in gathering support for the anti-Ottoman crusade. Benefiting from the temporary cessation of hostilities between France and England during the Hundred Years' War, the Hungarian king had managed to get favourable responses from the two nations to join his coalition. Also, surprisingly the most powerful man amongst the French nobility, Philippe II of Burgundy, would opt in to become the principal financier of the crusade, raising over 700,000 francs for the Hungarian king. Most likely, the Burgundian ruler saw Sigismund's anti-Ottoman crusade as an opportunity to demonstrate his duchy's newfound power, which had been won in the recent Anglo-French conflict. Philippe's son, John of Navarre, and many other prominent Franco-Burgundian nobles, such as Philippe of Artois, Enguerrand de Coucy, Jean de Vienne, Jean de Carouge, and their personal retinues, would all join the upcoming crusade.
Heck yeah, the boys are coming together, guys. Coalition time. Yeah, by the way, we have covered, I believe, the 100 Years' War on this channel, so feel free to check that out.
Meanwhile, the Italian merchant republics of Venice and Genoa, wishing to protect their lucrative trade routes and outposts in the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions from the rising Ottoman threat, would also join in the forming Hungarian-led coalition. Along with Constantinople, the Genoese colony of Galata had also been blockaded by Bayezid, an affront that would see the two rival Italian republics, in an uncommon occurrence, unite under the same crusading banner. The Knights Hospitaller of Rhodes, known for their piracy in the Aegean Sea, would also answer Sigismund's call against Bayezid, as they had been in open conflict with the Ottomans since the Battle of Kosovo 7 years prior. With the naval powers of Venice, Genoa, and the Knights Hospitaller all raising their banners against Edena, Bayezid was now faced with the threat of Crusader warships bearing down on his coastal territories. The Ottoman navy was still in its infancy during this era, which meant it could not effectively counter the more sophisticated warships of Europe. King Sigismund's acquisition of European allies would not stop there. Even though he had recently—
Yeah, again, like, on paper, this looks so bad for Bayezid, right? Especially, like, just already, like, the armies that will all be joining together, like, already looks bad. But, like, it's the ships, right? Like, Venice, Genoa, like, the naval superiority is another big one, especially here, like, Anatolia and the Balkans, which there's so many coasts, right? So many areas for the ships to come through. Like, that's already, like I said, on paper, just looks really bad for the Ottomans, you know?
been expelled from his country during the aftermath of the Battle of Rovine, Mircea I of Wallachia still commanded a sizable loyal host, numbering around a few thousand soldiers. The Wallachian ruler, perhaps in an attempt to regain his throne and garner Hungarian support to his claim, would join the anti-Ottoman crusade. Lastly,
yeah, Mircea's another one. I was impressed by him, because, like, he held off really well, and if he hadn't, you know, lost the support of his people, at least mainly the nobles, and straight up been, like, overthrown, I think he could have, you know, he definitely could have still held on to Wallachia. So, yeah.
Smaller contingents from Bohemia, the Teutonic Knights, the Holy Roman Empire, Naples, Aragon, Castile, Portugal, Navarre, the Swiss Confederacy, Savoy, Moldavia, Poland, and Croatia.
Holy crap! Look at this! Holy crap! This is all of Europe uniting into one. Like, at least most of it, you know? Like, yeah. But as we've seen with many of these crusades, it's really the internal power struggles. Yeah, on paper, they're all usually unified against a common enemy, but we usually see that self-interest arises among these kings, too many egos, too many big heads all in one. And usually, crusades we see infighting, or people not fully devoting themselves to it. You know what I mean? So, like, that division comes up, and it makes sense, because at the end of the day, sure, they have on paper a common enemy, but at the same time, there is rivalry among themselves. So, yeah, I think that might come into play. I guess we'll find out. Because if they really are on just one page with no issues, then holy crap, look at this. Look at all that. And just the Ottomans here. Oh, man.
Would also pledge their support to Sigismund.
I paid for my own college.
With a total crusading force numbering around 15,000 to 25,000 strong, converging on the Hungarian city of Buda, enthusiasm around Europe for the upcoming crusade was high.
So guys, we're gonna end the video right here. I'll see you tomorrow when we look at the Battle of Nicopolis? I'll see you tomorrow.